assistant is Brice McPherson from Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley. We had a conversation beforehand what his title is, so we settled on Specialist Emeritus, which sounds kind of cool. Not as cool as High Priestess, but. Brice has been involved with Southern Oak Dev pretty much since the beginning, set up one of the very first plot networks, and he's continued to work with this plot network as well as move over into the East Bay. So I think he's going to talk to us about today.
Thank you, Dave. Yes. So I'm going to describe what we've been doing in the East Bay Regional Park District since about 2008, up through most recent analysis we've done through last year. I just mentioned, as Dave mentioned, I started work in March of 2000. I think we were the first people to have plots on the ground to study this. At that time, mysterious malady that was killing trees in Marin County and also in Big Sur. After I was at a school picnic for my daughter's school in Berkeley up in Tilden Park and noticed that there was quite a bit of Southern Oak Death around. I contacted the East Bay Regional Park District's IPM specialist, Nancy Brownfield, who has since passed on. And she said, yes, they're aware they have it, but they know nothing about what it is, where it is, how bad it is, or anything about it. So I proposed that we could take the information we had acquired through monitoring in Marin and set up a plot network in East Bay Regional Park District to help them to get an idea of what they're confronting. And the rest is what I'm going to talk about now. The East Bay Regional Park District is the largest urban park district in the United States, although I might note that urban is somewhat misleading because a lot of this is basically wilderness. You don't have to go very far east of Oakland to find yourself in trackless canyons where you would not even imagine you're near one of the largest urban areas in the United States. It's like over 45,000 hectares total, about 35% of that in these 5 parks that we're looking at. Hope I get this right. Anyway, you see the Wildcat Canyon through Tilden down there. These are the parks along the East Bay Hills. Okay, park. So we have that about 35% of this total parkland is classified as Oak Bay woodland or forest. So starting in 2009 and then particularly in 2013 or 2011, we placed a total of 535 10-meter radius fixed plots randomly distributed across Oak Bay habitat. It was a hellacious amount of work for 1 year to do. In each plot, we basically tally every woody plant above about 1.5 centimeters DBH, and also all the coastline oaks. And then we also did 2 belt transects in each plot, 2 by 10 meters, in which we counted the seedlings of all these species. Just to summarize initially, looking at initially first assessment. So, for example, Tilden Park in 2009 we had 11%. 2015 we only got about 9% mortality or infection. Mortality hadn't changed much, so Tilden appears not to be doing very much. But some of these other parks have shown rather dramatic increases. With, like in Marin and parts of Wildcat Canyon, almost 30% of the coast live oaks are dead. These, as I noted, every tree that we look at, we go back and look at again for a reevaluation period. So there's a rather significant amount of mortality compared to 2010, 2011 when it was initially started. What I'm going to focus on primarily is the relationship between tree diameter and the probability of becoming infected and dying, because this turns out to be I think, driving a great deal of what we see in these forests. First off, we've shown repeatedly, and I think everyone who's looked at this knows that it's not only for coast live oak, it's also black oak and tan oak. The larger the tree, the more likely it is to be infected. I don't think this is because of surface area. I think it has to do with the physiology of the tree, but still seems to be an issue of debate. larger the coast live oak that's infected, the more likely it is to be attacked by the suite of Ambrosian bark beetles, which we've shown drive the mortality of the tree. A tree that's been attacked, that has not been attacked by beetles, has a significantly higher probability of recovering than a tree that has been attacked. And we did a study in which we showed that beetles introduce up to 50 different species of fungi deep into the sapwood, which obviously accelerates tree loss. Beetle-attacked trees tend to fail at a much higher rate than non-attacked trees, and in fact, a significant proportion. In a Marin study by 2018, 27% of the trees that failed had failed with green crowns. So there's a health issue, or a hazard issue here. And also, the larger the tree, and particularly in park areas, the large trees tend to be in places that people congregate often, or the places where people congregate, such as open fields, tend to have a lot of large trees next to them. So it becomes an issue of problem for the park district. Now, I mentioned that the larger the tree, the more likely to become infected. So I'm looking at sort of Redwood Park. This is something like 1,800 coast live oaks. I broke them down into size class between 0 and 10 to 28 centimeters, etc. This is the percentage of infected plus dead in 2011, and this is the percentage in 2015 to 16. So you can see that not only has a lot of mortality, infection and mortality occurred, but the bigger the tree, the higher the rate, or the higher percentage. Anthony Chabot Regional Park, which is, of the 5 parks out there, has the lowest percentage of infection at this point. The same phenomenon observed. Wildcat Canyon Regional Park, even more dramatic, but it's the same general pattern. The bigger the tree, there's a little drop off in here. I think this has something to do with the relatively smaller number, but the smaller the tree, the more likely it is to not be infected. So if I look at the previous one is symptomatic plus dead. If I look at symptomatic only, you see the same general trend, although it's not quite as dramatic, but mortality was rather considerably increasing the larger the tree gets. So this disease is, in a sense, selectively removing the larger trees from the landscape. And then I looked at the infection rate, that is between 2011 and 2016 to 17, or 15 to 17, as a function of tree size. And the bigger the tree, the higher the rate that that cohort is infected. It does, as I noted before, it tends to tail off here. I'm not quite sure why that is, but the smaller the tree, the more likely it is to survive. Then mentioning the issue, this is tended to be known as a coastal, more of a mesic forest type disease. Diablo Foothills Regional Park is part of the Regional Park District. It's adjacent to Mount Diablo State Park. Mount Diablo is considerably drier than the East Bay proper, that is the East Bay Hills. And these forests are primarily actually blue oak, Quercus douglassii forests, which are much drier. It's a different type of habitat. We found the highest percentage of infected coast live oaks of any of the parks we looked at. It's rather astonishing, and the same pattern holds, that the bigger the tree, the more likely to be infected. There wasn't that much mortality there yet, but the interesting thing is that there had been sod blitzes done in this area, and no positive P. ramorum plants had been reported anywhere from this area prior to our discovering that something like 40% of the coast live oaks were either dead or symptomatic in these plots. I'm going to switch gears briefly to, this is not wildecat, this is actually wildcat. This is a section of Tilghman Regional Park called Wildcat Canyon. This is 4 or 5 of the plots that we happen to have established on there, and this is a little study I was doing. Anyway, this is in 2014. This is Google Earth imagery. 2014, there was no obvious mortality. 2015 looks pretty good. 15, pretty good. 2017, you start to see a little bit. 2018, I don't know how well this shows up, especially if you're blue-green colorblind, or blue-red colorblind. Red-green colorblind, I have great sympathy for you because almost everything having to do with this disease is red and green. But there are dead trees all around in here. It's quite a few. I actually did a little, did a little survey of the trees in here, and something in excess of 50% of all the coast live oaks in here were either dead or infected. That particular little site, in 2013, this was the relationship between infected plus symptomatic plus dead and size. By 2018, this place has exploded. Tilden Park has gone from a rather quiet site for sudden of death impacts to one that's just, it's turning red if you can see the color difference. And these days, if you go up to Tilden Park, you will see lots of dead trees where not long ago there really wasn't much evidence of this. We also, the Park District also asked about a couple of these other parks that are somewhat more inland. Pleasanton Ridge and Las Trampas Wilderness, Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park. I did not do a randomly distributed plot network. We had neither the resources nor the time, nor for that matter, any way to do it, because these are incredibly rugged and steep territories. But just on this rather simple sort of a quick flyover type assessment, there was a pretty significant amount of mortality in Las Trampas and not that much in Pleasanton Ridge. Pleasanton Ridge still looks pretty clean. Las Trampas, you can see dead and infected trees all over the place. These parts are not exactly dry territory, but they are basically on the other side of the hills. So they're in a partial rain shadow, and yet there's plenty of sudden of death working its way through there. So just looking at actual quantitatively, how many mature? I'm basing this on the relationship between diameter and probability of becoming infected. I just did some rather equivalent of back of the envelope type calculations, knowing that these are underestimates, because for these parks it's only based on Oak Bay woodland that was large enough for us to put plots in, but there are plenty of coast live oaks scattered in areas that we would not have considered, and the Regional Park District just considered to be oak habitat, but there's plenty of oaks out there. If you look at the percentage, the infection rates, the percentage of infected, initially an estimate of the total number of coast live oaks greater than 20 centimeters diameter, and then take it out to the percent dead, and the total numbers, we're looking at up to 30,000 dead trees in Wildcat Canyon Regional Park. And it's not hard to believe if you actually look into this park. There are areas that look very much like somewhere in the east that a tornado has come through, because most of the trees are on the ground. And then looking at these infection rates and estimates of the total numbers, I'm estimating somewhere in the next neighborhood, some of these parks, we're looking at over 6,000 new infections in these somewhat larger coast live oaks per year, based on infection rates, based on assessment between 2011 and 2017 or 2018. Another thing I was looking at is the odds ratio, which is basically a logistic regression looking at the probability of new infections based on stem diameter. So I'm looking at the mean diameter of coast live oaks in these 5 parks, and the odds ratio, which is basically the likelihood of a tree becoming infected. And there's a very interesting relationship between mean DBH and probability of becoming infected, which again is consistent with what we see, but this is actually the entire park level. So then the real question is, where is this headed? We've had monitoring in Marin County since 2000. By 2018, we had in China Camp State Park, approximately 45% of the trees were dead. And these are trees that are all confirmed to be P. ramorum or consistent with it. So if a tree dies for an unknown cause, it is not included in any of these calculations. Marin Water District took a while, it's catching up. It's at about 40% in our plots since the coast live oaks are dead. If you look around across here, there's a lot of higher mortality or infection level in some of these plots, but not that much mortality. But these used to be around 25%. From around 2000 to around 2008, this percentage infected tended to hover around 22 to 25%. It's dropped considerably, but there aren't that many trees left to infect. So how do the East Bay parks fit in with Marin County, where we have, as I say, almost 20 years of data? So in our initial, these are all, this is only looking at trees that were initially asymptomatic, so no disease when we start the study, and then we follow to see what develops. And this is mortality, and you can see for Marin County, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of the initially asymptomatic trees, the total cohort, are dead by 2018. If you look at 30 centimeters and above, it's considerably greater, so we're looking at approximately something over 30% of the trees have now been killed. And the point is, here's Wildcat Canyon, here's Chabot, and here's Redwood. Now, they're at the early stages, but it's not hard to imagine that we're going to see the same trajectory. We also have no data on this, but we've been collecting phloem samples to be shipped off to Ohio State University for Nico Bonello's lab to potentially analyze for resistant biomarkers if we can ever get any funding to do so. But we basically went through these East Bay regional parks, and when we came back to redo plots, if a tree had previously been symptomatic and was no longer symptomatic, we collected phloem samples. We also have some for trees that were persistently hanging on in areas with very high disease levels. And the goal is to see if we can get some sense of how much of this resistance, apparent or survival, or resistance actually is potentially resistance based on chemistry. And I'm totally out of time, but just looking at basal earth, which is basically looking at the effect on the total, basically biomass, ultimately, of the forests, there's some pretty large numbers here. Like approximately 20% of redwoods, coast live oaks, have been killed by sudden oak death as of 2016, which is the last time this was evaluated. So, conclusion, very large oaks are on their way out. It's hard to see how that's not going to be true. Resistance doesn't seem to be as significant, the bigger the tree. And what's left? This is Chinatown State Park in an area that used to be, but it's near one of our plots. Almost the only green you see there is bay laurel. Another site, Chinatown State Park, used to be an overstory canopy. Now that's what you have. Anthony Chabot, I've basically divided into two sections because these actually differ in disease incidence and mean DBH, and also in the abundant. And so I'm just getting back to the point of what's left out there. So if I look at Anthony Chabot, you look at the proportion of trees in the 4 dominant species that we found in these plots. After you get beyond coast live oak and bay laurel, there's really not very much left. And there's a lot of introduced stuff. There's coast redwood here and there, but that's not dominant. That's not our coast live oak dominant. We've got some interior live oaks and canyon live oak. I just looked this up. Harvard Forest in Massachusetts tallies over 70 wooded species. Compare that to what we've got in the East Bay Regional Parks or Marin County, and it's very hard to see what's coming in after this. We have seedlings. I mentioned this Anthony Chabot Park. North versus south differ really considerably in the abundance of oak seedlings, small seedlings, medium size, and also saplings. Coast live oak really dominates over bay in terms of its impact on the forest. So even if you take the coast live oak, the bays are going to have considerably less of a useful impact. And I just finish up way beyond my time. These trees are going. In fact, I took this photograph in 2013. This is in Tulin Park. That tree was fine in 2013. It's now dead, and it's the only dead tree in the area. It's by far the biggest tree in the area. So, future is not a sunny one for big oak trees or for the things that people like about California's forest, which is the really large oaks. I'd like to acknowledge support for a number of people over the years, and particularly the East Bay Regional Park District, which has provided funding for this work. All right, thank you very much. Sorry I was too long.
So I'm going to pass it on to Phil for session.